Back in the studio again. Sarah's here with me. She's running the operations today, and we'll be looking to see if you have any questions that will pass along to me. Today, we're going to be talking about something really exciting, something kind of dear to my heart, and that's carburetors. So we're going to be just talking to carburetors on a very sort of high level. We call this Carburetor 101, just to try to explain what a carburetor is, what it does, and how you can look after the carburetor yourself, and what things to look for, what things you need to do. So the very basics of carburetors, I guess we should talk carburetors a little bit. Carburetors were originally starting to be developed back in the late 1800s. That's a lot of years, and over that time, there's been a huge amount of changes being made from a carburetor that was as big as a lunchbox down to something even smaller than this. And every single gas engine uses a carburetor in order to mix the fuel mixture with air and gasoline so that the engine has something to burn. Now, there are other ways of doing this, and that's like fuel injection and stuff like that. But we're only going to be talking about carburetors today. And that's on 90% of your outdoor lawn and garden equipment. So everybody knows that most gas engines have carburetors. But what do they do, and what do I need to do in order to make sure my machine runs properly? And it's important because probably in doing service, the most common issue as a technician we would face with were usually carburetor problems. The funny thing is, we all talk about our product and brands that we like, Tecumseh's and Briggs and Stratton and Kohler and Husqvarna's and all kinds of other cool brand names. But when something goes wrong, it starts to run rough, won't start, doesn't go at all, we blame, oh, it's this piece of crap, this shouldn't do this or whatever. In most cases, any issues with the machine not working right that's related to the carburetor is usually the fault of the operator or someone who's been using your equipment. You've loaned your chainsaw to the neighbor and you get it back and it doesn't work. It's not a bad product, and it's not a bad carburetor. It's typically improper use and lack of maintenance. So let's kind of talk about it a little bit more. So your basic carburetor, and I've got kind of examples of all the different products that carburetors are found in, be it a tractor engine, lawnmower engine, weed trimmer, chainsaw. We've got them all, even snowblower. So the lawnmower, we're down there. You can see our carburetor. On our weed trimmer, that's our carburetor. On some older style lawnmowers, a different looking carburetor, but again, it's doing the same things. Lawn tractor, again, has a carburetor. Now this one does have a fuel pump, so it's a little bit different, but it's still, from an engine running perspective, doing all the same things. And then even on your snowblower, it has a very familiar looking carburetor. So carburetors simply take and are designed to take your gasoline, have the gasoline being fed into the carburetor, and when the engine is started, its goal is to take the air that's being sucked in, to bring that air in through the carburetor, and that creates a suction within the carburetor, and it pulls fuel up from the bowl and allows it to atomize and mix with the air. And that mixture is what goes into your cylinder to be ignited to create enough of an explosion so you get rotation of your engine. So this is all happening pretty quickly. And these are pretty trouble-free in most cases. They have a float in them, and I'll show you that. They have a float because your engines are going to run at a certain speed when they're idling, and then when you need it to do work, it's going to speed up, so it needs more fuel and more air. So if you look at most carburetors, and this is a basic carburetor that you'll find on most lawnmowers, snowblowers, this design. Anyway, they have a float bowl, and that's the bowl there. And in their side, there's a float. Now, these floats that you see today are plastic. In days of old, they were brass, and they would eventually corrode a little bit, and fuel would get inside the float, making it heavy, and you would wind up with a lot of flooding conditions. So they moved them over to plastic, and what happens is when the engine's running, fuel is being pulled up through, and as it's using gas, the float drops. When it gets to a certain point, it opens up a valve to allow more gasoline to enter to the bowl, and as the bowl fills with fuel, as it raises, the float will go up and it'll close off the fuel supply with enough sitting in the bowl to run the engine. So it's a constant movement of the float up and down as fuel is being required. It's dictating how much it's going to let into the bowl itself. So one, it doesn't flood your engine, and two, provides the right amount for your engine to meet the needs that it's being asked to do. So below your float, just pulling this little rod out. If I pull the float off, you're going to see a little thing underneath here called a needle. And this little needle is actually the valve that, when the float drops, pulls away and the fuel passes by it into the bowl. When the bowl starts to fill, the float will move up and it'll push that pin back inside the carburetor. And I don't know if you can pick that up, Sarah, but there's a little green.
So we get, where are we at? Here we go.
Yeah, there's a little green seal in there, and that's your valve seat. So that little pin is going into there, and when the float says there's enough fuel in the bowl, it closes off. So those are the two main components that's inside your carburetor that are moving and doing something functional: the float and the needle and the seat.
So are those the parts that get gummed up?
Those are the parts that will get gummed up, or will get blocked by something, or not be adjusted right. As well, carburetors all have gaskets. They'll have a bowl gasket, and this one is pretty old and dry and would need to be replaced. They also have gaskets on either end where it attaches to the engine, and the other side which attaches to your air supply, your air filter. So it's important that those gaskets are in good shape, because if the carburetor is able to suck air in from any other place other than from the air filter, it's going to start really messing up your fuel mixtures, and you'll get them surging and not running properly or hard to start. The other thing that happens in carburetors is your throttle. When your engine requires more fuel and more of a demand to have more fuel mixture, the throttle opens up. Now keep in mind, the whole principle behind the carburetor is as the air rushes through, it's sucking fuel up like a vacuum. So when you open up your throttle, you're allowing more air to rush through, meaning it's going to pull more fuel. Fairly simple working, not a whole lot to go wrong with it, as long as that your fuel is clean and there's nothing there to gum it up or no dirt in it to prevent things from moving. Now, carburetors also will have, because they have to work in all climates, cold, hot, you need to be able to have them start in any temperature. So while they have the throttle plate that we just talked about that opens and closes on demand, they also have some form of starting in the cold. And on a lot of machines, especially snowblowers, what they use is a choke. Throttle, choke. So what'll happen is when you have a cold start situation and you engage your choke, it's moving this plate and it's closing off the airflow almost completely. And what that does is create more suction when the engine's turning over. And that increase in suction pulls more fuel and less air to be mixed with, which gives you a richer mixture. And in cold temperatures, that's what you want. And that'll allow your engine to start in cold temperatures much easier. So as your engine warms up and the air coming in starts to warm up, then you can start to ease your choke off, open it back up to a normal position, and now you're running an engine with full airflow and normal amount of fuel being pulled out. So that's just kind of the basics. Inside the carburetor, there's some other little passages that are used, and they're like an idle circuit and a high-speed circuit. And that's just so it can adapt to different conditions. And those are just basically little passages that are in the carburetor that are made when that are put into the carburetor when it's made. But those little passages are so small, they can easily plug up. So you take a little carburetor like this for a chainsaw, and it's very similar to what you see for a weed whacker. So those passages in there are so small, it doesn't take a whole lot to plug them up. And we'll just take this little guy apart. So you can have a real argument with your friends and workers that enjoy talking about lawn and garden equipment as to what's the most important part of the engine. Is it the piston and crankshaft and valves? Is it the ignition system? Or is it the fuel system? Or is it this little guy right here? Its whole purpose is to provide the right mixture to give you the best explosion in that cylinder to give you the most power. So if you look inside this carburetor, and this is a small carburetor you'll find on a weed whacker or chainsaw, you can see there's not a whole lot to it. There's gaskets, which are very important. If the gaskets don't seal properly, the carburetor will not work properly. It also has little valves, such as this little tiny flap right here. And this flap will simply, based on pressure and suction, either open to allow fuel in or move up against the passage to block it off so that nothing can come in. If you remove that, now you can see again another gasket and another passage for fuel to pass through. Now, let's just rip this other piece apart to show you what's in there. So carburetors were something that when they had a problem, they were fairly easy to service. In fact, you could actually, and you still can, buy repair kits. So if something's happened to your carburetor, either it's gotten plugged up or there's been fuel and water contamination that's been let go or corrosion, you can rebuild your carburetor. And you can do it just by buying a kit, which will include some of these gaskets, O-rings, and in the case of the other carburetor, a float and needle. These ones, it's more of these gaskets and the other little components that are inside. So if the carburetor is that great, and it's typically not a lot of moving parts, why should I have to replace it? Or why should I have to rebuild it? So the most common reason you wind up having to repair or replace a carburetor is because of you and me. And what I mean by that is the maintenance that we give the carburetor, the fuel that we put into the carburetor, and the air that we put into the carburetor. Carburetor just sits there. It's just a chunk of metal with little passages for air and fuel to flow, but everything else is based on what we do. So talk about fuel. How many have ever looked in your gas can to see how much debris is in the bottom? At the same time, if your carburetor and your engine is starting to run really rough or hard to start, won't keep running, have you taken a look at your fuel? Because if by chance your gas can has been sitting somewhere where it's been able to pull in moisture, when you pour that from your gas can into your engine, into your fuel tank, if you were to take your gas and pour it into a clear bottle like this section down here the cloudy, that's water. Condensation will form inside your gas can. And you'll eventually, over time, if you don't flush it out with fresh gas, you'll get water in there, which gets into your gas tank, gets into your fuel lines, and eventually gets into your carburetor. And that's where you start getting some corrosion happening. You'll also notice there's some little debris floating around in there. And again, if you look in your gas can, it's worth taking a look to see if you have anything like that. If you do, then you know when you pour that in, it's going to make its way to your carburetor. So the people that build small engines give you fuel filters. Just something like this, and this one would be off a lawn tractor or larger lawnmower, even a snowblower. Small engines like chainsaws, weed whackers, they'll have a filter screen in the gas tank, and those are easily replaceable. But again, we're responsible for what we put in the gas tank. So if we put crap into the gas tank and we don't maintain the filter or change it on a regular basis if we need to, then you're going to wind up pulling that into the carburetor. And the other thing is, how many of us leave the gas in our machines? Do we put fuel preservative in? If we don't use fuel preservative or we don't remove the gas from our carburetor while they're sitting there, things happen to that gas. You'll wind up with condensation, you'll wind up with corrosion, and you will wind up with something that looks like this. Now, if this was still on the machine and we decide, oh, let's fire it up, you fill the gas can with gas and fresh gas goes in here, all that material is going to start to break away and it's going to get pulled into the carburetor and pulled into the engine. So there's no way this carburetor is going to work right. The float's stiff, it's gummed up, it's sticking. So even if it does open, it's just going to allow a lot of this debris to go through and plug those tiny passages. Now this is a pretty, obvious worst case scenario, but this is what can happen. And this is what usually causes a problem with your carburetor. And that's why you're either going to rebuild it or just replace the carburetor. This is pretty far gone. We can clean this. We can throw it into a carburetor ultrasonic cleaner and see if it'll clean this up. But this is so far gone, I wouldn't waste my time with that. I would be looking at purchasing a new carburetor. And that's really easy to do. If you're at a point where you need a new carburetor or you need a kit and you want to, do the repair yourself, we have lots of videos on how to do that. All you need is your model number of your product, or if you have the model number that's on the engine. And again, that's two different model numbers. There's the frame model number, which is for like the machine. So any component you need for the machine, that's it. But if there's something you need for the engine, there'll be another number on the engine, and that's what you want to use for doing your parts lookup. And once you have that number, put it into, say, our site, for example, or a parts site, it'll pull up usually a diagram. Ours will give you diagrams. It'll give you part numbers, availability, pricing, and there may even be video for you showing you how to change it and how to repair your carburetor or how to replace it. But it's really up to ourselves in order to make sure we maintain our fuel supply. The other thing we do to mess up our carburetors is in regard to airflow. So we've got a good fuel system, we've got a good carburetor, and then we turn around and try and pull air through a filter that looks like this. Or this. Or this. So we're sitting there trying to get our engine to start. We're killing the battery, or we're just about out of breath trying to pull the engine over by hand with the pull cord, and we're blaming the engine for not doing what it's supposed to do, when in fact we've neglected to clean our filter or replace it in a timely fashion. And by doing that, we've now hindered the ability for the machine to work properly. And it's not the fact that the machine is a bad machine, it's just we're not maintaining it properly. Air filters are not that terribly expensive. These ones with the foam outer covering are some of the best filters out there. And this outer covering is washable. You can wash with soap and water and then just apply, when it's dry, a few drops of oil and squeeze it into the filter. And that will give you really ultimate protection for fine particle that catches even before it gets to the air filter. Some of these filters don't have that. This is a washable foam one that you used to find in most lawnmowers. This is what you're typically finding today is just the paper. These are still, very fine particle, but for the cost of it, change it every year. If you're mowing or running your machinery in really dusty conditions, you're going to want to probably change it even sooner. As this clogs up, you're reducing your airflow, you're reducing the ability for the carburetor to pull the fuel up because the air can't get through well enough, and you're just starving the engine of performance. So you may be saving some money by not replacing your filter on a regular basis, but you're going to be working your machine harder, longer, and it's going to run hotter as a result. So air filters, fuel filters, and again, your fuel is paramount. Gas has a shelf life. It's about 30 days before it starts to lose its ability to explode. And by that, I mean, we're talking about your ignition. So, you have good gas, good octane rating, good air, good supply. When that spark plug fires, your engine's going to start. But if you've got bad gas that's old, you don't have the same flammability. So you're going to wind up cranking the engine over more, pulling it more often than you should have to get it to start. Again, not a fault in the machine. It's just a matter of thinking about doing the maintenance. So you can save yourself a lot of headaches with your equipment by doing that proper maintenance. And same when you go to store it. You want to make sure that you're either draining your fuel and running your carburetor dry, or if you prefer, to leave your fuel system completely full, but put some fuel additive in it that'll help store it for like 3 months, and that way in between seasons you're good to go. So anyway, some basic stuff with carburetors. They're very, very important. They do an amazing job, and it just requires a little bit of attention. Now, snowblowers, like the one we have here, you'll notice on snowblowers there's no air filter. No air filter is okay because you're running in the wintertime. You're running in snow conditions. A filter would catch moisture, it would melt, it would freeze, it would block airflow. And really, you're in the wintertime, you're not talking about a dusty condition that you need that extra filtration to protect the air that's going through into your cylinder. So snowblowers, you typically will not find any kind of an air filter system. So that makes that, the snowblower makes that easier. But again, the fuel is an issue because you're working in a condition where the engine's hot, then you're storing it in a cold area. You're going to get condensation in the fuel tank, you're going to get condensation in the fuel bowl. So a fuel additive is the best thing you can possibly do for your snowblower. The other thing you tend to see in days of old, back, when I started working with them, carburetors had adjustments on them. You could adjust high speed, you could adjust your low speed idle, and you could adjust your airflow. So you could tune your engine based on your elevation, based on your fuel type, based on your octane rating. You could get your machine working really, really smooth and have the most amount of power. But a lot of things have changed, and they're changing for environmental reasons, which we all understand these days. So manufacturers were dictated that they had to meet certain ratings and the amount of emissions that their machines put out. So to do that, they had to tune their carburetor to a certain standard and keep it there. And by doing that, they had to remove a lot of the adjustment settings that you and I would tweak in order to give the best performance. Because they have to meet a standard environment exhaust content, they now have taken those adjustments out. So we don't have access to be able to get in there and tweak those machines, which means we're going to wind up in certain conditions, finding them being a little irritable in the way they run, and may work great this time of the year, but if you're in the damp season and the air is heavier, maybe it doesn't run as well. But that's why those adjustments aren't there for us to adjust. So that's also why you're starting to see some companies starting to look at maybe fuel injection and see where we wind up as far as the whole gas engine outdoor equipment situation is, because there's a huge push now to move over towards battery powered. That's a whole other topic that we're not going to create that fight today. So anyway, that's kind of the main thing about carburetors. I don't know, Sarah, if there's anybody with any questions or anything for us.
No questions.
Okay, well, that's good. So either, folks are doing other stuff today, or we're managing to get across a little bit of information that maybe you already knew or didn't know. But carburetor is a very important part of your lawn and garden equipment. You can certainly maintain it yourself. And if it is a problem and something needs to be replaced, again, you can very easily order the parts, and we'll help you through doing the replacement of those parts through our videos and through sessions like this, that we can help to answer your questions on how to keep your equipment working better and better.
Do you want to mention the exciting chainsaw live streams we're going to have coming up?
Well, sure, why not? This is a good time. Yeah, because we are going to be moving through summer pretty quick and heading into the fall, and those of you who burn wood are going to be thinking of getting the saw out and getting it ready, to get your wood cut, whether it's for this season or next season. And it's a good opportunity that we'll be able to show you some tips on how to maintain your chainsaw, things you can do in order to keep it running well and have it so it starts when you want it to start, as well as some tips on looking after it and storing it. So those will be coming up in other lives, and as well we'll be putting out some other videos on them as well.
If you tuned into a previous live where we gave away a lawnmower, there may or may not be some other power equipment in the queue for giveaways.
Ooh, I like that. Everybody likes giveaways. I certainly do. So you're right. We did just give away a lawnmower through one of our lives, and rumor has it there's going to be some possibly chainsaw, maybe weed trimmer, maybe even a leaf blower. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you advised as to when those lives are coming up. But please, by all means, subscribe and follow us. And we've got lots of great information on these live sessions. Today we're talking lawn and garden. Next week we might be doing something on appliances or power tools. And even if we are talking lawn and garden and you have a question regarding your appliances or power tools, put them into the comment section. We'll try and answer them during the live, and see if we can't help get you pointed in the right direction. All right, that sounds good. I think that's all for us today. Hope we've been able to give you a little information that's helpful for you, so you can keep your machinery working and maintained and running well for you. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Great. Thanks very much. Bye for now. Sarah's waving goodbye. Everybody have a great day.